I had a very close relationship with another Minsker Rebbe, and he was truly a giant. And I don't think I am belittling anyone else by saying, I think his loss is felt every day, especially by a good soul in America. His leadership was unbelievable for so many years. He was a ish eshkoilos, a mushlam, a huge Talmud Chochem. His forum Adas Yankov are outstanding, an Oved Hashem, a Rebbe to his Hasidim, and a leader of Klal Yisrael. Every fiber of his soul and his Shema was dedicated to Klal Yisrael. And he carried the Klal in his lap and on his shoulders. Ka'asher Yisro ha'oimein es hayonek. I miss him, and I'm sure all of you miss him every day. He was truly a giant and a leader of Klal Yisrael. So the title we learned today should be Lilu Nishmos, and he should be a Melitz Yosher for us all and for Klal Yisrael. He so much loved Klal Yisrael during his life, and Gedolim Tzadikim b'misos and Yosem b'chayayim. So the topic we're discussing today is that of Pesach Shechaliyas b'Shabbos. And actually yesterday, I gave my Shabbos a Gadol Drasha in my shul, and I just went through the entire day, starting from Erev Shabbos till Shabbos afternoon, starting from Tanis B'chayrim and Bir Chometz and Mechiras Chometz. I don't think I should do that today in our shir, because I assume every local Rav at his shul will give clear guidance, and there are probably going to be 1,000 pamphlets coming up explaining everything, and probably last Shabbos you already saw all that those halachas. So I won't go through the entire system, but let's focus on matzah and how do we do shalosh seudos on Shabbos. So Rabbi Gottesman discussed with you the various different options, but those options are relevant for hotels. So in normal circumstances, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of medaktikim and mitzvahs go to hotels. They go to hotels in America, in Europe, in Eretz Yisrael. To me, that is strange. Growing up when I did and growing up where I did, it never occurred to me to go to a hotel for a Pesach with all the k'pedus and all the chumras, but this is becoming more and more common. Even great people, Talmidei Chachamim, more and more people are leaving their homes and going to hotels. I think this year, very few people, due to COVID-19, will be going to hotels. So the major problem is hotels. Hotels can't afford, they can't have chametz. They can't have chametz Shabbos. When you're in the house, yes, so you'll leave a kazayas chametz for each and every member of the family. And you keep it in a plastic bag and you sit in the porch, you sit in the backyard and you eat chametz, and then you dispose of the chametz Shabbos morning and you come in and you eat your Pesach meal. So the various different options of matzah shira, of chremzlach, of kneidlach, or matzah shenefa shalol lishma, those are for hotels. In your private home, it's very simple. You leave some challah, some bread. But we still have many questions. Most notably, so how do we do shalosh seudos? One Suda by night. We daven early in the morning because Sav Zman Achilas Chometz is relatively early. I don't know when it's in America, but in Eretz Yisrael, this coming Shabbos is going to be 10 past 10. So you could only eat Chometz till 10 past 10. 10 past 10, we're all in the middle of davening in shul. So many of us will be davening with the nates, others will be davening not necessarily nates, but early in the morning. And you come home, you wash, you eat a kazayas chametz, and then you dispose of the chametz and you eat a proper Pesach meal. Most families will use disposable kelim for the Shabbos meal because we don't want to mix even remotely chametz, with Pesach dike kelim, Pesach dike dishes, and you dispose with the chametz of time. So how do you have shalosh seudas? So there are two fundamental eitzes. One would be splitting the Suda in the morning. You wash, you have some fish, you bench, take a walk, come back, wash again, have the meat, the chont, whatever it is. But that's problematic. First of all, from the practical aspect, it would be very stressful, time concerning. Would we have enough time in the morning to wash, eat a meal, bench, and you need to have somewhat of a hefsek, shouldn't be defined as a brocha she'ein tzricha, and then you wash again. Could one have two sudas beleil Shabbos? It'll be far more convenient to split the sudas leil Shabbos and have two sudas leil Shabbos. And then in the morning, you don't even have to get up early, because shalosh sudas you could be yoitzer, as we learn in Siman Reish Tzaddik Aleph, with peiros, with wine. According to many poskim, you don't even need mezainis or pas. B'shas echtak, we rely on we yotzei shalosh seudas with peiros, with wine. Would that be an option? So this week I wrote a tshuva and I said, there's a big machlaikas regarding the shalosh seudas. Reish Tzaddik Aleph quoted in the Beisaysev and many other poskim. So the Ramban, the Rashba, and the Ritva, Shabbos Kuf Yud Zayin, bring the Alochas Gedolos. Alochas Gedolos says you need to eat 3 sudas Shabbos. When? Doesn't matter. Everybody chooses on his own. Shabbos, you need to eat 3 sudas. But the Rambam clearly says, Suda ba'arves b'layla, the morning, and mincha time, in the afternoon. That is clear in the Rambam. Is that Miyakov? L'chayre, yes. Tshuvas Rosh is the earliest source, splitting a Suda in 2, and the Rosh says it is acceptable. It's not defined as a bracha she'ein tzricha. So to me it is clear, 2 Sudas by night and 1 by day, no. That is so unreasonable. Suda Shabbos need to be normal. It's not normal that you eat 2 Sudas by night and the entire day you only eat 1. So that definitely is not an option. And that is why we do not find that eitzah in any Pesach. So you have 1 Suda by night. What do you do in the morning? So many have the minig, as I said before, splitting the Suda. I don't think that's a good eitzah. According to the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Reish Tzaddik Aleph and Hilchos Shabbos, shalosh seudas needs to be bisman mincha. And that is the opinion of the majority of poskim. The very same Tshuvas Rosh that justifies splitting a Suda makes it very clear. Suda Shlishis needs to be Shabbos afternoon. And by splitting the Suda in the morning, according to the vast majority of poskim, you're not yotzei shalosh seudas anyway. Second problem would be another halachic issue, bracha she'ein tzricha. How much hefsek do we need to make between one Suda and the other? Igros Chazon Ish, Chelek Aleph Simakuf Peiches, Chazon Ish writes half hour. Does it really mean a half hour? Where does he take this from? Why a half hour? Darkei Chaim v'Sholem is the minhagim of the Munkach HaRav, the Minchas Alaza. My father learned in Munkach. That was not in the days of the Minchas Alaza, but as a child, he saw the Minchas Alaza twice, when his father took him to Munkach, and he got a bracha from the Minchas Alaza. So the Minchas Alaza was one of the great Rabbeim of his generation, pre-Holocaust, but he was also Gadol B'Yisrael, and his shuvas are very important shuvas. So on Darkei Chaim v'Sholem, it is quoted the meaning of the Minchas Alaza was 15 minutes. The Mishnah Brura writes, Shahus Ma'at, a little time. To me, it is clear from the Mishnah Brura, doesn't need to be a half hour, it doesn't even need to be 15 minutes. Some time. But the Mishnah Brura doesn't specify how much time. The most important source is the Chemed Moshe. That goes back 200 years. The Chemed Moshe writes, Hiluch Daled Amis. How long does it take to walk Daled Amis? A second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds? That's what the Chemed Moshe says. And that is closer to what the Mishnah Berurah says, Shahus Ma'at. But the Chazon Ish writes about a half hour. It's not in Chazon Ish al Shulchan Aruch, it's in the Igros Chazon Ish. But anyway, it is somewhat problematic. Washing, benching, washing again. So when I do split a Suda, I usually take a walk with the family outside. So we walk for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then we come back home. But Erev Shabbos in the morning, it's not a reasonable option from the practical point of view, especially if you have a big family and you have little kids or anything around the table. It's very stressful. I think the more reasonable minhag is have one Suda in the morning, you eat a kazayas pas, you actually need to eat a kabetza because otherwise you can't say a bracha l'tilas yadayim. And then you dispose of all the chametz and you sit down to a proper meal. On Shabbos afternoon, you sit down with a cup of wine or grape juice. You could have some fish, some flesh, some fruit. The Mishnah Berurah paskins basar v'dogim is preferable to fruit because basar v'dogim has more resemblance of a proper meal. But you could be yotze with peiros. Preferable, have some meat, have some fish, some mecholim of Yom Tov, or mecholei Shabbos. And that would be your shalashudis. Because b'shas adchak, we rely lachatchila on the opinions that by Suda Shlishis, you don't necessarily need to have pas, and not even mezainis. You could be yotze with peiros, migdonos, wine, and that is the more reasonable minhag. So I don't split the Suda in the morning. I just wash the bread in the morning. We eat a kazayas or a kabetza. You dispose of the bread, and then we'll move into the dining room. I'll wash outside in my yard. There's a big glass door. From the dining room table, you see the yard. From the yard, we see we're going to have the meal. And that is my minhag, and I think that is the more reasonable minhag. So Rabbi Gottesman told me he discussed with you the tshuva I wrote about how about Kufayin Zayin Siv Beis? It is there that we learn that if people sat down to a meal and his sichu dat menapas and they took the bread off the table, then the bread no longer patters the other food. And you need to say a bracha lefnei v'lachlei whatever you eat. So is there any clearer hesach hadas menapas than erev Pesach shechal liyas b'Shabbos? We're afraid of that bread like we're afraid of poison. So we go out of the house, we eat a kazayis, we throw away the bread, we dispose of it, and then we eat the meal without even thinking about bread. Do we need a bigger bracha? That's a very powerful argument. But I made my opinion very clear, no. The Shulchan Aruch writes that this halacha is not really very relevant in our day and age because we are not Mesiach Das Menapas. That was the custom in days of yore. So the way I understand this halacha based on the Chazon Ish Simachov Zayin and the Bialoch and Simekufayin Zayin is Pas is only poiter ikar haseudo. So when you're Mesiach Das Menapas and they remove the bread from the table, that proves, that indicates that this is no longer ikar haseudo. So we have the Sif of Shulchan Aruch on the screen. The hamoitzi v'berchas hamazon ein poitrem elo masha nechal torch ikar haseudo. And if you remove the bread from the table, it is no longer ikar haseudo. it would be ridiculous to say Erev Pesach Shechali is b'Shabbos when you remove the bread from the table, it is no longer Ikar HaSuda. We didn't even start the Suda. And therefore, in our scenario, we remove the bread from the table just because we're afraid of having chametz in the house and having chametz on our dishes and our table. It is only out of yiras chet, a dikduk adin. But the Ikar HaSuda didn't even start yet, and pas poiter Ikar HaSuda. And I brought a Geraya Gedoyla, and this is fascinating, from Toises Reb Yehuda HaChosid, in Brochas Daf Mem Aleph. Reb Yehuda HaChosid asks an amazing question. And it's a surprise that other Rishonim don't ask this very same question. That is the meaning of koirech b'leil HaSeder. But according to Chachamim, we eat matzah, morer, and then Pesach, and we don't mix them. It's a machlokas Rishonim, according to the Chachamim. Is it preferable not to eat them together? Or the Chachamim just mean to say it is permissible not to eat them together? According to some Rishonim, it is preferable not to eat them together. So, Bizman Shebeis HaMikdash Hayu Kayim. According to Chachamim, we ate matzah, then we ate more than we ate Pesach. We did not eat matzah together with Pesach. And the moment you finish the Pesach, you cannot eat matzah anymore because ein maftirin achar Pesach hafikoyman. So why wouldn't that be considered siluk pas min hashulchan? Pesach hadas min hapas. So before you start eating the korban Pesach, you finished with a matzah because you eat Pesach by itself, not together with matzah. After Pesach, it is a prohibition. You could no longer eat matzah because ein maftirin achar Pesach hafikoyman. So is the matzah part of the Pesach? Do you need to say a birchas shahakol on the Pesach? Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says no. Because the fact that we eat no more matzah doesn't mean that the main Suda is over. No, the main Suda didn't even begin. The main Suda is Pesach and only Korban Pesach. Nothing else. So that is the Ikar Suda. And the reason we don't eat matzah is just a halachic reasoning, not because we finished the Ikar Suda. And that is why the matzah would still be poiter as a Pesach. And that is exactly the same rationale and the same reasoning. Erev Pesach Shechali is b'Shabbos. The Ikar Suda is still a fanenu. We didn't start the Suda. And the only reason we're not going to eat any more challah is just a halachic reason. Like Korban Pesach with matzah. And therefore, yes, the pas is still poiter es kol hasuda. 16 years ago, I will never forget this. A younger man came to me totally devastated and agitated. He got up late. It was 9 o'clock, half hour before. So it's manachilas chametz. He didn't daven yet. And he asked me, what am I supposed to do? If I daven, I'm going to miss Zman Achilas Chametz, and I won't be able to wash. Should I eat the Suda before davening? It's an issur to eat before davening. Or should I go daven and I won't have any bread to eat of the Suda? Interesting shaila. My psak was go daven, and then you're going to wash on matzah and you're going to eat matzah. I remember the shock and the expression on his face. He was taken aback. It didn't even occur to him that that would be my psak. And it just seemed so impossible to him. And I thought to myself, this is a great psak. I need to publicize this psak. At least the effect will be that nobody will get up late on Erev Pesach Shechali is b'Shabbos. because people would feel awful washing and eating matzah Erev Pesach. Well, maybe they should feel awful about eating matzah Erev Pesach, and maybe that is reason enough to get up on time and daven with everybody else and wash for Achilas Pas. So let me explain my psak. There are three options. Go daven, and you want to have a Sudas Pas in the morning. Option number 2, wash and eat pas, eat bread before davening. Option number 3, daven and eat matzah. I think option number 3 is the reasonable one. Shabbos Kuf Yud Zayin Amid Beis, Kame Seudos Chayav Odom Melech Oil B'Shabbos. Sholoi Seudos Reb Chidka Oimer Arba'am. And the Gemara brings the source of Shalashudis. How do we know a person needs to eat 3 Sudas and Shabbos V'Yoim Moshe? Ichluhu Hayoim Ki Shabbos Hayoim Lashem Hayoim Lo Timtzeu B'Suda. So 3 times the pasuk says Hayoim, and it is from here that Chazal learn Chayav Adam Lechal Sholosh Seudas B'Shabbos. They shine him on the spot. It's mashma that it's a mitzvah diurais, because the Gemara quotes a pasuk, and the Gemara doesn't say it's an asmach. The Levush, Simaresh Sadak Aleph, clearly says it's a mitzvah diurais. So for some reason, the Mishnah Berurah writes, Asmechoho Akra. Mishnah Berurah maintains, and that is the opinion of many poskim, Shalashud is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, it's an asmach. However, I made it clear in my Sforim and various different sources, Asmachta has chumrah more than in other d'Rabbanan. It's not only the Ritva, famous Ritva, Rosh Hashanah Tezayin, the Ritva says an Asmachta is korav l'diurais, it's almost the diurais, it's lots in a Torah. But even the opinions that disagree with the Ritva, and I wrote a huge kuntras about this Ritva, and I think I brought about 30 sources, supporting the Ritva and contradicting the Ritva. But in any event, an asmachta chomor tfei. So Shalosh Sudas is either a diuraisa or an asmachta. First 2 Sudas need pas. That's a sif in Shechanoch Reisha and Dalet Sif Dalet. Shalosh Sudas, as I mentioned before, you could be yaisa with Peres, with Yayin, with Mezainas. But the first 2 Sudas necessitate pas. So skipping Sudas Shabbos would be a violation of a mitzvah diuraisa, or at least a mitzvah chamura. Shulchan Aruch writes, Reish Tzaddik Aleph Sif Aleph, Yehi Zohia Ma'oid B'Shalosh Sudas. Zohia Ma'oid B'Shalosh Sudas. The Aruch Shulchan in Sif Aleph, and Reish Tzaddik Aleph writes, was a takana of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is interesting. Option number 2, eat before davening. That's a Gemara in Brachas Yud Amid Beis. Ma'idach siv lo yisaychlu al adam. The Gemara says, lo yisaychlu koidem shetispalalu al dimchem. Once again, it seems to be a diuraisa because the Gemara quotes a pasuk. And then the Gemara quotes another pasuk. Oisi yishlachtu achrei gavecho al tikra gavecho ele gayecho. Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu li'achar shenizgo hazeh. Kivel olav oil malchus shamayim. So the Gemara seems to be very machmir. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, how arrogant is this person? First he eats and drinks, and only then would he daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So once again, this seems to be an Issa D'Oraisa. Lo yisachlu al adam. But there are different roshes on Lo yisachlu al adam. Many maintain it's an Issa D'Rabbanan. But still it's an asmach that's based on a posik, so it's a halacha chamura. Option number 3, eating matzah. This is a halacha that's not found in the Bavli, only in Yerushalmi, Samach Esom and Beis. Oichel matzah b'erev Pesach, hareu keboyer arusosoi bebeis chamiv. That's an interesting comparison. What's the common denominator? What's the tzad shava? This is a surei bia, and this is eating matzah erev Pesach. Two thoughts. Pashtus advorim, not that they're the same. The only thing these two have in common is it could be a great mitzvah in its proper time, but before its proper time, it would be an avera. So yes, the kesher between ish ve'ishto la'achar chuppah v'kedushin is fundamental in Kedushas Yisrael, but in its proper time, after chuppah v'kedushin. Aboil harisosi bebeis chamav is an avera. In a way, it's the same with matzah. La'achar tzeisa kechovim, it's a mitzvah chaviva, but before its proper time, it's an avera. Time has not come yet. Some of the Rishonim, the Meiri, the Rav Yo, Chuvas Ma'ariva, and Kuf Tzadi Gimel, give a very interesting observation. So you cannot be with your wife until after Kiddushin and Chuppah and Sheva Brochas. Sheva Brochas Nisuin that we say under the Chuppah. You cannot eat matzah till after Sheva Brochas. And there are 7 Brochas Beleila Seder before you eat matzah. So let's count them. 3 Brochas and Kiddush. Boire Priya Gofen, Mekadesh Yisrael Vazmanam, and Shehechiyonu. Then Boire Priya Domo by Karpas is number 4. Natilis Yadayim would be number 5. 6 and 7 are obvious. Hamoitzi lechem en ha'oretz asher kedushoru b'mitzvoisa v'tzivonu al achilas matzah. So we have Sheva Brochas before a person could be with his wife in the night of his wedding, and we have Sheva Brochas before eating matzah. V'hu she'omru chachomim, hu eichel matzah b'yerev Pesach k'boil harisosi b'beis chamav. Is this an issa d'oraisa? No. Well, the Chok Yankov writes, yes. But that's a huge chiddush. Chok Yankov writes, be'erev toichel matzah slava bu melchal asei, be'erev v'lo biyom. But that's very unreasonable. And mitzvah asei is never interpreted as a lava bo mechlal asei. It is only when the Torah uses positive language and it's not a mitzvah asei that the interpretation is lava bo mechlal asei. But if it's a mitzvah asei, it cannot be a lava bo mechlal asei. The Torah says be'erev toichel matzah, that's a mitzvah asei. Before erev, it's not a mitzvah, but neither would it be an avera. So this definitely would be an issa d'Rabbanan and not an issa d'oraisa. It's clear in the Rambam, and I'm quoting the Rambam. Perek Vav, Chametz Matzah Halacha Yud Beis. Asru chachomim lechol matzah b'erev Pesach kedei sheyeh heker la'achilosa be'erev. The Rambam explains this halacha. Chachomim asru lechol matzah b'erev Pesach, and that is mishum heker. If you're going to eat matzah all day, it wouldn't be obvious that when you eat matzah by night, it is l'shei mitzvahs matzah. So that doesn't seem to be an avera chamura. The Meiri says it's all about kedei sheyochel matzah l'teyavoin. So this is not an avera chamura. Definitely is not the mediorais, only the Rabbanan. It's not an asmachta. Tosfos Rid says it's not even a halacha psuka, and his argument is it's not in the Bavli. So this brings us to a very fundamental question in Darkei HaHirah, Darkei HaPsak. So as we all know, if there's a contradiction, a stila between Bavli and Yerushalmi, the Bavli always has the upper hand. And the most fundamental source of halacha is Bavli and not the Yerushalmi. How do we deal with halacha that we find in Yerushalmi and it's not to be found in Bavli? It's not contradicted in Bavli, but it's not in the Bavli. So usually we pass in accordance to the Yerushalmi. There's no steel in the Bavli. However, when we're not dealing with a coincidence, but with a shaila which is negaya to each and every Jew, each and every year, If this halacha isn't found in Babli, then obviously the Babli rejects this halacha. So the Yerushalmi says, Oichel matzah b'erev Pesach is a prohibition. Why isn't it in the Babli? This is a question which is nageya to every Jew every year. So if it's not in the Babli, should we assume that the Babli says it's not an Isser? If it would be an Isser, why isn't it in the Babli? And that is why Tosfos says, we don't paskin this Yerushalmi, but it's in the Rambam. And it's in Shulchan Aruch as well, so we do paskin this halacha. But nevertheless, it is kalish shebekalim compared with the other two options, eating before davening or entirely foregoing and not eating Sudas Pas and Sholosh Seudos in Shabbos by the second Suda. And that is why my Pesach 16 years ago was daven and eat matzah. And I was so happy this year to realize that I was mechaven to the Chassam Sofer. How come I never heard of this Chassam Sofer? Because it's not in the Tshuvas. If we'd be in the Tshuvas, I probably would know about it. Chassam Sofer Chidushim al Hashas Chelek Aleph. At the end of Masechet Pesachim, there are some Chidushim al Seder HaShulchan Aruch. Chidush Chassam Sofer al Seder HaShulchan Aruch Hilchos Pesach. Not in the Tshuvas, but in Chidush Chassam Sofer Chelek Aleph al Seder Moed. Simin Tov Mem Daled. The Chassam Sofer says, if a person has no bread, he has no bread, Erev Pesach Shechaliyas B'Shabbos, he should eat matzah. And the Chassam Sofer says, why? Because this halacha is not found in Babli, and it definitely is only in Issa D'Rabbanan. I was overwhelmed. So the halacha is not in Babli, but it's in Rambam, it's in Shulchan Aruch. Some Sofer wasn't aware that the Tosfos makes this argument, and he says, "Ein halacha k'divrei Yerushalmi." Some Sofer was fully aware halacha k'divrei Yerushalmi. It's in the Rambam, it's in Shulchan Aruch, but nevertheless, there is significance to the fact. It's not a Babli, it's only Yerushalmi, and it definitely wouldn't be more than an Issa D'Rabbanan. And the comparison to Boiler Asosa Bebeis Chomer writes Chassam Sofer is just a dimyon ba'alma. So it's not an Avera Chamura. So, Baruch Hashem she'enchani b'derech emes, and my Pesach is validated. It's in the Chassam Sofer Chidushim at the end of Seder Moed. And this Pesach is extremely relevant, not only for a person that got a plate and couldn't daven. There are thousands of frum young soldiers in the IDF. I'm not talking about hotels, people that choose to spend Shabbos in the hotel. So in the army, a week before Pesach, there is no chametz. Chametz doesn't come into any army base because it is impossible to have this mishmash and mixture of chametz and matzah in army bases. That would be tragic. That would be a big michshol. So what do they do? Erev Pesach Shechaliyas B'Shabbos. So in some kitchens, they have matzah shira. It's not shaykh in most of the installations, and definitely not in remote outposts. So my psak to them was, eat matzah. That is the story of Tshuvas Chassam Sofer. So out of the three different options, not eating a Sudas Pas, or eating before davening, the best option, and the lesser Isser would be eating matzah erev Pesach. So that was my psak. So today we discussed some interesting questions about erev Pesach Shechaliyas B'Shabbos. I put aside all the other sugyas of mechilas chometz, bia chometz, tanas, b'chorim, and we focused on Sholosh Seudos. Before I say goodbye, I just want to share a story with you I related this story yesterday in my drasha. It is probably the saddest Seder I ever heard of and the most inspiring Seder I ever heard of. And this is a story I heard many times from my late father, Zecher Tzaddik Levrocha. Many times he told the story at the Seder. And that was Seder Leil Pesach, 1945 in Mildorf. Many times I shared with you the story how my father first met the Kloisenberger Rebbe, second day Shavuos in Auschwitz-Birkenau. I won't tell that story again. It's an amazing story. 10 months later, we move fast forward. They were together the entire period. And they were in Mildorf, which was a Nazi labor camp. I don't know what it was. Suffolk extermination camp, Suffolk labor camp. But it was Gehenna, however we define it, however it was defined. 2 months before Pesach, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, that giant Tzaddik Yesod Olam, was busy talking about his matzahs. And he said, we need to prepare a Seder, we need to make matzahs. People, some of them were amused and others were annoyed. Some of them just laughed at him. Crazy man, where will you have matzahs? One of the Hasidim was Moshe Lezer Einhorn. I remember the person from Williamsburg. I was annoyed because he loved the Rebbe and he admired him. And he said, it's embarrassing. Stop talking about your matzahs. Matzahs don't fall out of heaven. We won't have matzahs. The Rebbe was confident that HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't forsake us. B'siyata d'shmaya, let's hope, let's daven. We'll have matzahs, Be'ez Hashem. In the most miraculous way. About 2 weeks before Pesach, Allied bombers destroyed a big train hub, big train station about 40 minutes from the camp. And the Nazis took about 50 Jews every day to clean away the debris, to clean away the rubble from the train tracks. The trains should be able to roll because the Nazis needed those trains to bring supplies to the front and Nebuch to bring Jews to the gas chambers. So one of the train cars that was destroyed was full of grain, and tons of grain was spread out and dispersed in the fields and on the tracks. And some of the Jews every day coming back to the camp brought a few kernels of grain. They tied their pants at the bottom and they brought back some kernels of grain every day. B'mesirus nefesh, the Kloisenberger Rebbe with a small group of Hasidim took some rocks, crushed those kernels of grain, and they had Erev Pesach matzahs. You know what Erev Pesach matzahs mean to Hasidim? So one Jew was standing at the door of the barracks, just looking around to warn the others if a guard will come remotely near to their tzrif. They baked matzahs. And my father always used to show with his hand. This was the size of the matzahs. Because they rolled those matzahs on a brick. And the brick was only that big. So they had little matzahs, each of them the size of a pancake. And whenever I tell the story, I say, I doubt those matzahs would get the hechsher of the Yeda Charedis. But on the other hand, I am totally convinced that the nachas ruach and the impression those matzahs made in all the olam eseliyanim, ad kisei hakavod, was unprecedented and unparalleled. Came Seder night, out of the hundreds of people in the building, approximately 10 sat around the Kloisenberger Rebbe. His face was aglow with a radiance from distant worlds. And he recited the entire Haggadah Baal Peh. There were 10 people. Most of them were to be great Rabbonim. the Vishever Rebbe, the Nir Batarov, and some others. They were amongst that little group that sat together, Balela Seder in Mildorf, 1945, Tafshin. And they had a Seder, and they ate matzahs, and my father was one of them. This is an unbelievable story of Mesirus Nefesh. And it's like a beacon of light in the greatest darkness. It is like the nace that Yosef Tzaddik was Zoicha in his pit mulei Nechoshim V'Kravim. Orches Yishma Elam Bovig Maleim Noises Nichois V'Tzri V'Loit, and Rashi writes, Ein Darkum Shel Gemalim Shel Arvim Ela Lo Seis Neft. It was a miracle. And the Bala Musa say, what was that miracle about? The Kodesh Baruch Hu just sent Yosef a message. I know this is painful. But I just want you to realize I have not forsaken you. I did not forget you. It is what it is. But I'm here right with you in this pit. That was a nace that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent to those Mesiras Nefeshi. I have not forsaken you. I didn't forget about you. I'm right here with you in Mildorf, in the Nazi barracks. And when I tell the story, I wonder, when they said Hallel, what went through their minds? What did they have in mind? Ahavas Hashem, Emunah V'Betochen. Their situation was probably worse than Aviseinu B'Golas Mitzrayim. In Golas Mitzrayim, there was no systematic killing, extermination of the Jewish people like there was in the Holocaust. We find that the Jews in Eretz Mitzrayim complained. So their complaints weren't heard, but they complained. No one complained in the Nazi camps. There was no point in complaining. The only answer to your complaints would be a bullet in the head, an immediate murder. They were in a worse situation than in Golas Mitzrayim. So why did they say how? They thanked the Kodesh Baruch Hu. For what? For choosing them. Choosing them for what? For torment, for torture. Yes, they thanked the Kodesh Baruch Hu for choosing them. So I heard many times from my great Rebbe, the Klozim Rebbe, that a mummer once asked them in one of those awful Nazi camps, so Rebbe, do you still say Ato B'Chartono Mekol Ha'Amin? When this is over, will you still say Ato B'Chartono Mekol Ha'Amin? And that every response that I will say it with more fervor and more passion than ever before. Baruch Hashem, we are the oppressed and not the oppressors. Yes. Re'u ma bein beni leben chomi. I will forever say Ato B'Chartono Mekol Ha'Amin. So this is a story I heard from my father, and this is a story that I will forever relate to my children and grandchildren, and I hope Mashiach doesn't come, they will tell this story to their children and grandchildren as well. Because this is the story of ultimate Mesiras Nefesh and Dveikus in HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the most difficult of times. And I try to imagine sitting there in that unbelievable Leil Seder with my father and with my Rebbe, the great Kloisenberg Rebbe, the Divrei Yatzev. So I find this story tragic and inspiring and uplifting. So we've been through difficult times, but we always were together with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu was always together with us. So have a beautiful Seder and a beautiful Pesach and a Chag Kosher v'Sameach, and we should deserve to Nisam and Aflois ki ameitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu niflois bebias goel tzedek b'meiru v'yomeini amen. Have a beautiful Yom Tov.